What's good? This is Rich, and you're listening to the Mental Wealth Show, where it's all about health, wellness, and healing for mid-career professionals. And on today's episode, I'm chatting with the author of Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life, Nir Eyal. Now, I got a bit of a confession here. We had this conversation a year ago, and I never got around to releasing it, partially because I was in the midst of my own identity war. So I may sound a little different, and some of the references during the conversation may reflect 2022 themes. But more importantly, we chop it up about how distraction is really about avoiding the uncomfortable, how to turn your values into time, hence the episode name, how behavior change facilitates identity change, go figure, the tyranny of the to-do list, and a lot more. Now, there's really something divine about the timing of these conversations. I feel like I recorded this a year ago because I needed it today. And I've said on the show in the past that I feel like I've talked to guests right when I needed the message that they were sharing with you. And not just for the content with this one today, but it's also a reminder of the progress, because this was the first episode where I think I started calling myself an athlete, and look at what's happened since then. But before getting into the conversation with Nir, another reminder that May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I'm available to speak to your company, organization, or employee resource group /ERG about how mental health and well-being translate to your performance, the wealth that comes with healing, and so much more. If you're interested in looking like a genius by booking a dope speaker, now I'm not calling myself a genius, I'm just saying that you may look like a genius by booking me, because I do consider myself a dope speaker. Send me a note at info@findmorebalance.com. Again, info@findmorebalance.com. Now here's the conversation with Nir, and I hope you enjoy. Nir, welcome to the Mental Wealth Show.
Thank you so much. Great to be here with you.
Man, we're going to have so much fun in this episode. We caught up a little bit beforehand, and we're definitely going to talk about Indistractable. But to start off, what does mental wealth mean to you?
Mental wealth to me means that you live the kind of life where you are served by your mental health, by the techniques that you have in your life, versus you serving and being someone who takes orders from your mental state.
And do you remember when that became important to you?
So I'll tell you a time when I had to reassess my relationship with mental wealth. And this was when I was with my daughter one afternoon, and we had this beautiful day planned. And I remember we had this activity book of different things that dads and daughters could do together. And one of the activities in the book was to ask each other this question. The question was, if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I remember that question verbatim, but I can't tell you what my daughter said, because in that moment, I was controlled by distraction. I started checking my phone, and I told my daughter, oh, one quick second, I just have this one thing on my phone I need to check real quick. And when I looked up from my device, she was gone. She'd left the room because I was sending her a very clear signal that whatever was on my phone was more important than she was. So she went to go play with some toy outside. And that's when I realized, wait a minute, I am not in control here. I am letting these things control me. And at first I blamed the technology, right? Let me be very clear. I thought it was the technology that was distracting me. What I later realized after 5 years of research and writing was that I was doing this to myself, that I was letting myself be controlled by my inability to deal with what we call internal triggers. And we'll get back to this a little later. But that turned out to set me on this journey of, reassessing, wait a minute, why is it that I said I was going to be with my daughter here. I said I was going to be fully present. I'm with someone I love very much. Why am I not doing that?
Right.
And when I when I thought about all the areas of my life where I did that, it wasn't just with my daughter. It would happen when I say, oh, I'm going to eat right and exercise, but I didn't and I wouldn't. It would happen when I would say, oh, I'm going to work on this project professionally, and I'm not going to let anything get in my way. And yet 20, 30, 45 minutes later, I'm doing everything but the project I said I was going to work on.
Right.
So I found that once I started noticing distraction in my life, it was everywhere. And it was the culprit behind all the things I wasn't doing in life that I wanted to do. It wasn't that I didn't know what to do, right? We all know what to do. Who doesn't know how to get in shape? Eat right and exercise. Who doesn't know how to be better at your job? Do the hard work that other people don't want to do. Who doesn't know how to have better relationships with people? Be fully present with them. We know this. And if you don't know it, Google it, right? The problem isn't that we don't know what to do. The problem is we don't know how to get out of our own way. We don't know how to stop being controlled by distraction.
Yes. Yes. So much of that. And part of what I also found interesting was you talked about the way that distraction is about avoiding what's uncomfortable,
Right.
which I hadn't thought about it that way, but it makes complete sense. You know, where even if it's being in a bus stop or an elevator, the first thing you do is you pull out your phone because you don't want to uncomfortably have to make eye contact with somebody, you know, or it's getting awkward at a dinner table. So you pick up your phone, you look at it, or even just when you're sitting at home, the discomfort of having to deal with the thoughts that are in your head or some of the voices that you may hear.
That's right.
Again, avoiding discomfort.
That's exactly right. And this is a huge point. This is like the revelation that we don't want to hear, but we have to hear because we keep blaming the tools. And by the way, society has always done this, right? We think that distraction is some new problem that Facebook and the internet and, whatever technology created. If you look back 2,500 years ago, Plato, the Greek philosopher, was talking about how terribly distracting the world was. He called it akrasia, the tendency to do things against our better interest. 2,500 years ago, okay? People have always been complaining about distraction, whether it's, people said this about the radio and the television and the newspaper, and like literally every new technology gets blamed for distracting us. And that's never the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem is that distraction begins from within, that time management is pain management. Let me say it again. Time management is pain management. We have to learn how to deal with discomfort because the number one source of distraction is looking to escape some kind of uncomfortable sensation. Boredom, loneliness, fatigue, stress, anxiety. This is why we look to escape. These are the kind of sensations we look to escape. And what do we escape them with? Distraction, something to take our mind off of that discomfort. So whether it's too much news, too much booze, too much football, too much Facebook, we're going to find a way to distract ourselves unless we deal with the root cause of the problem. And that's what Indistractable is all about. That's the first step to becoming indistractable, is mastering these internal triggers, or they become your masters.
Now, something that was interesting to me, I heard someone say that work was their escape or work was their distraction, which, we've all dealt with our fair share of things in life. And to me, and a lot of what we see out there is work, it's the rat race, it's this, it's you go get a paycheck. But for some people, work actually is the distraction.
Totally.
So how do you think about it in that context where maybe somebody is performing well at work, but when you get outside of work, their life is in shambles, and maybe it's, hard for them to think about this in that context where work is actually the thing that's distracting them from everything else in their life?
Right. You've hit on the archetype. That's exactly right. So where we see, and it's a known thing, right? We call them workaholics, right?
Yep.
People who look for escape from one area of their life by investing in another areas of their life, but to the detriment of that other area. So there's nothing wrong with work, right? Work is a beautiful thing if it's something that, it gives us a lot of meaning and purpose and camaraderie with folks. So it's a wonderful thing. Just like social media is also great, right? I'm not one of these anti-tech, chicken little tech critics that blame everything wrong in the world with social media. Come on, it's a wonderful tool if you use it properly. The question is, what does it come at the expense of? So the idea here behind becoming indistractable is to know the difference between what is distraction and what is the opposite of distraction. So if you ask most people what is the opposite of distraction, they'll tell you it's focus. But that's not true. That if you look at the origin of the word distraction, it shares a common root, trahare, from the Latin to pull, with the word traction. So the opposite of distraction is traction. Traction and distraction. Traction is any action that pulls you towards what you said you were going to do, things that you do with intent, things that move you closer to your values and help you become the kind of person you want to become. The opposite of traction is distraction, anything that pulls you away from what you plan to do, anything that pulls you further away from your values, further away from becoming the kind of person you want to become. So this is super important because anything that you say that you want to do with your time and attention in advance, that is traction. So if you want to work, great. You want to play video games? Wonderful. You want to go on social media? Do it. Don't feel guilty about it, but do it according to your values and your schedule, not someone else's. So if you say, hey, I want to work 40, 60, 80 hours a week, and that's what you say you want to do in advance, wonderful. It's not up to me or anyone else to tell you what to do with your time and attention. Same if you want to play video games all day, right? Like, why would someone have the right to tell you, no, that's morally inferior? Don't do that. If that's what you want to do in advance, the problem is people say they want to do one thing, right?
That was going to be my
follow-up. I want to
follow-up.
eat right. I want to exercise. I want to get to bed on time. I want to read books. I want to take courses. They say they want to do all this stuff. That's traction for them. but it doesn't happen
Right.
because of a distraction. So if I say, hey, I want to be with my kid, but I work is now a distraction. And the problem with this is if this is left unchecked, you live your life running real fast in the wrong direction. And you look back on your life and you're full of regret because you didn't spend enough time doing traction. You were distracted.
Man, I've got multiple follow-ups, but I'm going to pick one of them. I'm going to go with the one that's in my head right now. And we talk about distraction in the context of these various things that, I don't want to use the word interruption, but they help us escape from what may be our reality. But how about distraction in the context where somebody hasn't even identified their values yet, for example. And so you say, being indistractable is moving toward your goals, your values. Some people don't even know what those things are.
Right.
And what they think are their values are often someone else's values or values that were imposed upon them. So how do you think about even doing that initial work to actually get to the root of what's important to you versus what others are saying it should be important?
Such a great question. So the first step to becoming indistractable is mastering those internal triggers, understanding what those uncomfortable states are, and then having tools ready to go, right? I give you over a dozen different things you can do with that uncomfortable sensation to make sure that you can use it as rocket fuel to propel you towards traction rather than allowing you to escape it with distraction. So that's step number one. Step number two, to your question, is about making time for traction. Making time for traction. How do you do that? We have to acknowledge that you cannot call something a distraction unless you know what it is distracting you from. Let me say that again. You can't call something a distraction unless you know what it's distracting you from. So if you have a big white open calendar, right, with nothing planned, what did you get distracted from? Right? Everything is a distraction unless you know what you wanted to do with your time. You have to identify traction in order to know what is the opposite. What is distraction? So when I see people who have an open calendar of their day and they think that's going to make them more productive because, oh, look how much time I have to get all the things I need done, those tend to be the most unproductive days and the most unproductive people. That high performers across the board, what we find, they plan their time. Now, how do you plan your time? You turn your values into time. You turn your values into time. There's a reason that we use the same language to talk about money as we do about time, right? You make money just like you make time. You spend money just like you spend time. You pay attention just like you pay with dollars and cents, right? And yet people are cheap with their money, right? We clip coupons, we split checks, we try and save, but we won't spend 99 cents on an app because we're trying to save money. We're so cheap with our money. But our time and attention, we just give it to anybody, right? Facebook this, Twitter that, Instagram this, friends this, boss that, kids this. We give our time away to anybody who wants it. We're super generous with our time and we're stingy with our money. It should be exactly the opposite. Why? Because you can always make more money. You can always make more money, right? I don't care if you're Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or whoever, you cannot make more time. You get the same 24 hours in a day. Right. So we should be stingy with our time and generous with our money. How do we do that? We have to plan ahead. So to your point around what if you don't know what your values are? The problem is it's a very hard question for people to answer. If I say, what are your values? I'm not really sure. I never did the homework assignment to figure that out. Yeah. It's okay. So as opposed to a vision board, right? Or a regrets of the dying or my 10-year plan, what I ask people to do is let's start with tomorrow by asking yourself a very simple question, which is, how would the person I want to become spend their time? Okay. How would the person I want to become spend their time? Because what are values? Values are attributes of the person you want to become. Values are attributes of the person you want to become. So what I want you to do is to plan your day, just tomorrow, based on how the person you want to become would spend that time. That's how to identify your values. So I separate these into these three life domains. Mm-hmm. You can use any tool you like. I use these three life domains of you. You are at the center of these three life domains. If you can't take care of yourself, can't take care of other people, you can't make the world better. So how would the person you want to become spend time taking care of themselves? Okay, that can include, hey, time to read, time to exercise, time to rest, right? Do we have a bedtime? Right. We all know how important sleep is, right, to our mental and physical health. Yep. How many of us have a bedtime? Put it on your calendar. If you want to play video games, do you want to go on social media? Great, do it. But put it on your schedule. Have a time for it. Then the relationship domain. Part of the reason we have a loneliness epidemic in the industrialized world is because people don't make time for their important relationships.
Yeah.
So your best buddies, your spouse, your kids, your parents, put time on your schedule to connect with them. Then the next bucket is the work domain. And this is where most people start, but I actually think it's the last life domain. And work can be divided into two subdomains. We have what we call reactive work and reflective work. Reactive work is reacting to stuff, reacting to emails, reacting to notifications, reacting to phone calls, reacting to requests. And that's how most low performers spend their entire day. They're just reacting all day long. High performers make time in their schedule to reflect. They make time to strategize, to plan, to think, for God's sakes. These kind of things can only be done without distraction. So putting time in your calendar for reflective time, right? Time to think is absolutely critical. And now that we have our day planned, right, in advance, the day before, now we can look at that and finally know the difference between what is traction, what is distraction. We understand what our values are so that we can live the life we deserve.
Love that. Now let's talk about this time blocking, because the concept of time blocking isn't new, but what I liked in the book is the way that you talked about it as more of an iterative process.
Right.
Because for me, ADHD, other, PTSD, all of these things going on that make it really hard for me to focus at times. And in the past, I've had these stretches where I put time and I put blocks on my calendars, but I don't get the things done within that particular amount of time. And then shame, I feel bad. What's wrong with me? I can't even get this stuff done. So, I see you nodding. People don't see you nodding on the other side, but when you're maybe even struggling with just like the concept of having blocks of time and being able to work within those blocks, how you handle that. And I think the iterative process you speak of addresses that a bit.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is super common, and it's what I call the tyranny of the to-do list. The tyranny of the to-do list, because most of us have a perception that if we say we're going to do a task at a certain time, we need to finish that task, right? This comes out of this methodology of a to-do list of I've got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to check these boxes when I finish the task. That's messed up. It's a bad mindset. It doesn't work. In fact, it backfires. So the right mindset is not to say, oh, I have to finish this task, because you're never going to finish everything, right? That's the problem with to-do lists. There's no constraints to a to-do list. You can always add more to them. As opposed to when you force yourself to make trade-offs by making a time box calendar, you're saying this is less important than that. You're prioritizing. So that's the first really great attribute of time boxing, is that it forces you to make trade-offs. The mindset shift is that when you have a time box, no matter what the thing is you want to do, the goal is not to finish the task. The goal is not to finish the task. The goal is one thing: to do whatever it is you said you were going to do without distraction for as long as you said you would. That's it. It doesn't matter what the task is. It can be, I want to watch Netflix, okay? It can be, I need to work on this big project. It can be, I need to answer emails. Whatever it is that you said you were going to do with your time, it's not to finish, it's to do it without distraction. That's how you're going to reinforce that you did the task, that you worked on that time box correctly. Here's the kicker. People who do that, people who simply measure themselves based on did I do what I said I was going to do without distraction, finish more. They actually get more done at the end of the day than the people who measure themselves by how many cute little boxes do I check off. Why? Because the people who measure themselves based on, how many little things did I finish? Here's what happens. They do the easy stuff. They do the urgent stuff.
Please don't expose me right now.
Oh, this is join the club. I wrote this book for me. Research is me search. This is me. I mean, my book is autobiographical. I did all this stuff. And when I read the research, when I actually went into the psychology studies that showed how people behave, this is what we do. We do the easy, we do the urgent, the hard and important stuff. When we start doing, we do it for 5 minutes and then we check email. We do it for 10 minutes and then we do something else. And we constantly get distracted, so we never have a good stretch of time to work on it with our full attention. Whereas if you say, hey, I'm going to work on this task for 30 minutes, that's all I'm going to do, nothing else, two really great things happen. One, you get into this focused work mode, you do better work, but also you begin to understand how long things take you. So the problem with to-do lists is that there's no feedback loop. You don't realize how long things take you because most people are doing them in small little increments.
Yeah.
Whereas opposed to a time box schedule, when you say, I'm going to work on it for 30 minutes, it doesn't matter if I finish. I want to just see how far I can get in 30 minutes. You're learning, oh, okay, I had this thing I need to do. I got about a third of the way through it. It took me 30 minutes. Great. Now I can allocate how much time I need to put into the task in order to finish it later on. So you're getting smarter and smarter the more you use it. And then, as you said, you iterate, right? The goal here is not to be a drill sergeant. It's not, oh, you were a bad person because you didn't finish the task. Throw that idea out the window. You are now a scientist. What does a scientist do? A scientist makes a hypothesis, runs an experiment, looks at the results, and then runs another experiment. So if you see, okay, I worked on this task without distraction for 30 minutes, here's how far I got. Now I can run another experiment and I can adjust my calendar for the day that's coming tomorrow and make more time or less time as I need it.
Now, there are folks too who they'll be good at getting this set up, and then they'll find that they're like me where I'm good at getting like the first 50 to 60% done, but sometimes it's that last 10 to 20% where I struggle. I've launched many a thing only to see it flounder because the follow-up wasn't there. What have you found with folks in terms of, well, one, if that's come up where people are like, you know what, like I make progress. I know that I'm not trying to finish it during this period, but I find that when I get to a certain point, I don't get that dopamine anymore or whatever it is that's triggering the effort. How do I kind of regain that to be able to get myself across the finish line?
Yeah, fantastic. So the first step again is mastering the internal triggers. Second step is making time for traction. Third step is about hacking the external triggers. So hacking back all the pings, the dings, the rings, anything in our outside environment that might lead us towards distraction. The fourth step is to prevent distraction with pacts. And so this is where we put a firewall between us and distraction. It's the last line of defense to prevent us from getting distracted. So for example, one of these they're called pre-commitments. So one type of pre-commitment is called a price pact, where there's some kind of financial disincentive to getting distracted. So for example, I had researched this book for 4 years. Okay, I dove into all these research studies and I read everything I could on the topic. I read everybody else's book on distraction and focus and productivity. And it was finally time to write the darn thing. Okay, and I came across this technique in the psychology literature called a pre-commitment. And so I made this pre-commitment with a buddy of mine, Mark. And I told Mark, I said, if I don't finish this manuscript by January 1st, I'm going to give you $10,000. $10,000. Okay. You think I finished the manuscript? Do you think I gave Mark the $10,000 or did I keep the $10,000? Of course I kept the $10,000.
Yeah,
Are you kidding me?
I hope.
So here's the thing. I hear all the time from people who say, I can't, right? I don't, and I won't. So why not? Well, let me ask you something. If I charged you $50,000 for finishing this task, would you finish it? Yeah, you would. Unless, of course, now there is an asterisk here. Some people really do have a pathology that prevents them from doing so. Even if you put a gun to their head, they could not redirect their attention, right? There's some kind of very severe conditions. It's a very, very small percentage of population that requires kind of heavier artillery. But for the 99% of people out there, if you ask yourself, oh, I for some reason I don't finish the task. Okay, let me ask you a question. If I said, if you don't finish it, you're going to have to pay me $50,000, would you finish it? Well, yeah. Okay, so we've established you can. Now we're negotiating on the price.
What's interesting, though, is...
But just real quick, one important thing to note, that is not the end-all solution. So I don't want people to think, oh, well, I'm just going to make a price pact with my friend, and then that's going to make me do it. No. That's the last line of defense, okay? You have to do the other 3 steps first, primarily the emotional aspect. Okay, mastering those internal triggers. It's about diving into, wait, why do I lose motivation? What is it? Do I fear success, right? Is it that I know it's going to create more work for me later on? Is it that there's some kind of uncomfortable itch, right? Some kind of emotion that I'm not addressing? That has to be the first step. Then making time for traction. So for example, saying, oh, I tend not to finish the project. Again, it's not about finishing. It's about putting in the time without distraction. So what you'll find is if you just say, I'm gonna have that time in my schedule. If I don't work on this task, I'm gonna sit there and be bored for 30 minutes or an hour because that's the time I allocated to do nothing but this task. What you'll find is you'll find something to do.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh, I don't know what to do. I bet you if you sit and thought about it for 30 minutes without distraction, you'd figure out what to do. right? But people expect the answers to just come to them and be handed on a silver platter. You have to put in the time to think. So it's about these 4 steps in concert: mastering the internal triggers, making time for traction, hacking back the external triggers, and then finally, as the last line of defense, to make sure you don't get distracted, that's where we prevent distraction with pacts.
Got it. And now and within the examples you gave, so there's kind of like the negative motivator of having money taken from you, like having to pay someone, like, ouch, that hurts, versus positive motivation, you get to do something. And it's interesting because when it's say, hey, if you do this, you'll get X amount of money. I can imagine someone like doing a cost benefit analysis and actually turning money down in some instances, whereas having something taken out their pocket, like it feels like much more of a consequence. So how do you think about that in terms of even with habit building, where there's kind of a negative motivating factor versus the positive motivation?
So when it comes to this technique, this is not, you're absolutely right, that a negative reinforcement or punishment, if people can escape, they do escape. So it's a terrible way to build habits. However, used very occasionally, right, sparingly for something that is very important to you, can be very, very useful. And the idea here is that you never exercise that punishment, okay? That's the big point here. So, I didn't have to pay Mark because I finished the darn thing, right? So you're absolutely right. Like, if you get a consistent form of punishment, then you'll quit. You'll escape the rubric altogether. You'll just leave it. So it's not a good way to build a habit, but it's a good way to keep you boxed in to something you committed yourself to. By the way, we do this in society all over the place, right? If you think about the institution of marriage, why do we get together in front of everyone we know and put rings on our fingers and profess to God that we will be together forever? That is a commitment pact. Now, It doesn't always work, right? People get divorced, but it erects friction. It erects a barrier. It erects a commitment that makes us more likely to stick together. And by the way, it's only one of 3 commitment pacts. So there's also an effort pact where there's some bit of work, some kind of friction to doing something you don't want to do. And the most powerful is actually what we call an identity pact. So an identity pact is where we describe ourselves by some kind of moniker. And we find that when people have an identity, they're much more likely to follow through with conforming to that identity. So if you think about when someone says, "Oh, I'm a vegetarian," right? A vegetarian doesn't wake up in the morning and says, "Ooh, what should I have for breakfast? Should I have a bacon sandwich?" No, they are a vegetarian. It is who they are. So it becomes much easier to conform to that identity. So this is why the book is called Indistractable. So Indistractable, it's a made-up word. I made it up. It sounds like indestructible. It is your identity. It is who you are, right? An indistractable person is someone who strives to do what they say they're going to do. They are as honest with themselves as they are with others. And so telling yourself that identity and telling others, you know what? I don't answer every WhatsApp message and SMS within 30 seconds. I'm indistractable. I make time in my day to think in 30-minute increments. I'm indistractable. Yeah, I do some things that are a little different. Is it that different from someone who eats a special diet or wears religious garb? No, it's who you are. Which, by the way, reminds me about why we need to be very careful with the labels we put on ourselves. That many of the labels we have for ourselves don't serve us. So whether someone says, "Oh, I have a short attention span," or I'm not a morning person, or I'm a Sagittarius, very dangerous.
Wait,
okay, we got to make sure.
Are you saying a Sagittarius is dangerous?
No. The label. Yeah, that when we think we are a certain way, we conform to that belief, right? We have to, especially with many of the labels that many people don't deserve to put on themselves, right? When it comes to, "Oh, I'm no good at time management," or "I have a short attention span," again, asterisks to the people who actually are diagnosed with a disorder, and even those who do have a disorder, many of them can overcome ADHD with many of these techniques that I describe in the book without pharmaceuticals. And so it's very important to make sure that our labels serve us as opposed to us serving our labels.
It's interesting. So 2 things on that front. One, I decided to start calling myself an athlete. And we were talking about this up front, me getting back into track and field. And I started to call myself an athlete because when I'm in athlete mode, it's actually a positive cycle. Huge. Because I know if I eat like crap, I'm going to have a bad workout. if I don't get enough sleep, I'm not going to recover in time. So I guess there's still some negative motivators there, but still there's this kind of just like mindset that I get into of these are the things that I need to do to be successful. And at that point, it's automatic. It actually makes decision making easier.
Huge. That's such an amazing insight. I like to say that behavior change necessitates identity change, that you have to see yourself as something different. And so it's exactly right. Like if you see yourself, I am an athlete. Well, what are the kind of things that athletes do? Do they go out drinking and abuse their bodies? No, that's not the kind of thing that athletes really do if they want to perform, right? Or do they, there's all kinds of other things that don't conform with that identity. And we see this in religion. The psychology of religion shows this in spades. When someone says, I'm a devout Muslim or I'm an observant Christian or whatever the case might be, that identity takes out much of that decision making of, well, what should I do? Well, I conform to this identity. So we can use that to help us be who we want to be.
Man, I love that. Now, on a related note, you also spoke about powerlessness in terms of mindset. And I've been there myself where I've been in situations where I've felt powerless. And it can happen a lot when you work at a large corporation or even a smaller company where, maybe you're in a position where you want to be able to help people and you're not the decision maker, or you feel like no matter what you do, you keep ending up on bad teams and so on. So I love that you talk about kind of like the way that plays a role in the actual output that people get. So can you talk about how folks can combat that, since it can be common to feel like you're constantly running into roadblocks or you're not getting to where you think you should be in life and you feel a little bit powerless as a result?
Yeah. So there's some fascinating research done on the type of workplace environment that actually causes depression and anxiety disorder, which is very rare in the social sciences. Usually we have correlational studies, but we don't have causation. But in this case, there was a famous study done by two researchers by the name of Stansfield and Candy at Oxford. They found that a work environment that displayed two particular attributes literally led to depression and anxiety disorder. And so when you ask people, okay, what type of work do you think would be depressing, right? I thought it would be, working in a slaughterhouse or, a mortician, right? That would be a depressing job.
Yeah.
No, it's not. Actually, those people can be very happy. It's not what we do, it's the work environment we do it in. And it turns out that there's a workplace environment with two criteria that literally causes depression and anxiety disorder. And those two criteria are high expectations coupled with low control. Okay? High expectations and low control. If you have high expectations and high control, no problem. People tend to rise to the occasion. But when you have high expectations and low control, that's when things go off the rail. This is the kind of work environment that literally drives people crazy. And what happens is when you have a workplace environment that has high expectations and low control, and then you add technology to the mix, this makes everything even worse because there's this expectation to always be on, right? To always be available, but you lack control to set your own schedule. And so that's why half of Indistractable is about the things you can do yourself, which we should all do, right? We should all become indistractable and proclaim ourselves to be indistractable. But we shouldn't be so naive to not realize that many of the things we do in various environments, like the workplace, which is why we need our workplaces to become indistractable. And the good news is that technology isn't the source of the problem. Culture is the source of the problem. The problem is that we can't talk about the problem. But when we do talk about the problem, we can fix it. And there's some very simple ways that we can build companies, organizations, no matter what level in the hierarchy you're in, to help people become indistractable within the workplace.
Now, I like that you mentioned that because I was already thinking, how do you shift culture at work? Because there are these books that talk about even the 4-hour work week, and I only check my email at this time, and you can't apply that in corporate America. If your manager hears that you only check email once, that's not acceptable.
Oh my God, I'm so happy you said this because one of the worst piece of productivity advice that I hear people saying all the time, I'm sure you've heard it a million times too. If you want to be more productive, if you want to be more focused, you have to learn how to say no. What kind of stupid advice is that? That's the kind of advice that only a tenured professor could give to people. You're going to tell your boss, the person who cuts your checks every month, no thanks, I don't want to do that. That's ridiculous. You're going to get fired. That's terrible advice. So you don't want to say no. That's bad advice. What you want to do instead, the beauty of this technique that I describe in Indistractable of time boxing, is that it gives you a physical artifact, right? Now, when you have a time box calendar, that is something you can share with your manager. So what does this look like? This is what I call schedule syncing. Schedule syncing takes 10 minutes a week. Okay, here's what it looks like. You sit down with your boss, Monday morning, let's say, and you say, hey, boss, here's my schedule for the week, okay? I've planned out how I'm going to spend my time working on various projects. So here's my schedule, in my 9 to 5 or whatever working hours are for you. Here's my schedule for the week. Now, you see this other piece of paper that I have over here? Here is where I listed out all the things that I couldn't fit in my calendar. Can you help me prioritize? Your boss's number one job, the number one job of any manager is one thing: prioritize. That's it. Everything else is details, right? I've made 30 angel investments. I've invested in 6 unicorn companies. What I look for in every CEO I back is the ability to prioritize. That is your manager's job, or in your job, if you're in leadership, prioritize. Everything else is details. So what you're telling your boss is when you show them your calendar, you're showing, look, I did my homework. I planned my week ahead. Okay, here's how I would prioritize things. But there's these things I couldn't fit into my schedule. So help me prioritize. So do you want me to go to that meeting, or should I work on this project? Is this important, or is that more important? So what you're doing is 2 things. You're helping your boss do their job by helping you reprioritize and giving them visibility into your schedule. And you're setting expectations in terms of when you are available to do reactive versus reflective work. So by showing your boss, here is when I will be doing reflective work. Here's when I cannot be interrupted. Okay, from 9 to 11, that's when I need my creative thinking time, right? I'm not going to be available from that time. You're setting that expectation up front because they approved, so to speak, that calendar. And let me tell you, your boss will worship the ground you walk on. I've started 3 companies. Let me tell you, every manager out there is wondering, what the heck are you doing with your time? Even if you're a high performer, they want to know, what are you doing with your time? But they're not going to ask you because they don't want you to feel like you're micromanaged. So this is how we manage our managers, right? How we manage up is what we call it. And this is something anyone can do.
And you talk about managing up, which is something that I've struggled with in some ways in the past, because sometimes even drawing those boundaries just by the dynamic of the relationship, manager, employee, it's the same way we'll not take vacation time or we'll feel bad about taking vacation time. It could be challenging for someone to actually set those boundaries. And I could even see a space where someone would feel like them going to their manager with their calendar and asking them to help prioritize could symbol that like this person needs hand holding, and they might worry about that coming back and biting them in the ass during performance review season. So how can people go about getting over kind of that mental hurdle which usually there's some type of shame or something hidden at the root of it, but go about getting over that mental hurdle to put down that boundary or to make that ask that they feel might get them received negatively, though that's not actually the case?
Yeah, so a few things. One is to, blame me, so to speak, right? Tell your boss, hey, you read this book. It's a bestseller. It's helped thousands and thousands of people. And so this book talks about, Indistractable talks about how to make sure that you can stay focused and be more productive at work. And I think this is really going to, we should give this a shot. So blame the expert, right? Show them the book. Maybe even if they could read it, that would be even better. Give them your copy. And then the next thing to remember is that, bosses don't get upset over 10 minutes of sharing your calendar. They love that. They want the transparency because, again, they have no idea how you're spending your time. So if you do that proactively, that's not something bosses typically get mad about. What bosses get mad about is when we say we're going to do one thing and we don't deliver. That's what bosses get mad about, right? When the expectations don't meet reality. And so what you're doing is essentially setting those expectations up front. And again, this is 10 minutes. It's, hey, look, I have this organized schedule. Here's how I plan to spend my time. Can we just go over it real quick to make sure that it's prioritized properly? And what you're doing by showing them that list of things that aren't on that calendar is showing them that you didn't forget, right? Many times managers are asking, wait, did you still got that project that is due? Yep. or that I want to make sure you're working on? So having that regular check-in once a week, let's say, and saying, yep, I know you want me to do all these things. Here's where I'm fitting into the schedule. What you will always find is that the boss is going to say, you know what, actually, that meeting, for example, that's actually not as important as that project. So I really like you to put more time to that project. They want that control. They want that agency. They don't expect you to be able to make those kind of priority decisions. They want that input, but they're probably afraid to ask you. And so what you're doing is by setting those expectations, you're much more likely, one, to deliver on those expectations and make sure that those expectations are realistically set. And the proof is in the pudding, right? The more you do this and show that, yeah, you do follow through, you are able to meet your obligations, that's the kind of person that people want to do business with.
Yeah.
Right? People want to do business with people who deliver.
Yeah, exactly. I've been a hiring manager myself. You want people who can do the job. I've hired the people where, you have to train and it becomes, and there's a space for that, but where you have to train so much that it almost becomes like I should have done this myself type of situation.
Yeah.
And there is a clear difference between the people who come to you. And then sometimes it'll get to a point where once you establish the type of relationship and cadence you're talking about, that the manager will just be like, you know what, I trust you. Or like, you know what, I don't even have to, check about this particular thing.
Think about what the alternative is, right? The alternative, what most people do is they fear what you said earlier of, oh, I don't want my boss to think I'm incompetent or that I'm not doing my work properly. And so they delay and postpone, and every time the boss says, can you do something, they say yes, because they feel bad saying no, so they take on more and more and more and more. Then deadlines slip, they don't deliver. Now you've got a real mess. Now you've got a real problem because you didn't expectation set properly. You didn't give them transparency into your calendar. When you do mess up, now it's a train wreck.
Yeah.
So you want to get ahead of that, right? Don't let that happen in the first place by setting those expectations.
And there's even a financial component in a way, because if you're having these conversations throughout the year, there's no surprises when it comes performance management season and it's time to talk about raises and promotions and bonuses. You've already been having this conversation every week. There's no like, no, wait. You meets expectations. Whoa.
Yeah.
Well, I have been exceeding. We've been aligned, and you'll already have it documented in a way as well.
Totally. And you're making your boss's life so much easier at that performance review time because you've got 52 weeks of what you did right there in front of them.
Ah, man. So Nir, we're rounding toward the end of this episode, and there are so many other things I want to talk about, but we only got so much time today. But one thing that was interesting beforehand, where we found that we had a little bit in common, you made some lifestyle changes, and you've gotten into fitness as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I'll be 44 next month. That sounds really crazy even saying it out loud, but yeah, I don't feel 44. Yeah. And I'm in the best shape of my life. And I don't say that because I have good genes. Quite the opposite. I used to be clinically obese, but I'm in the best shape of my life now because I don't get distracted from doing what I say I'm going to do. If I say I'm going to eat healthfully, I do. And if I say I'm going to exercise, that's exactly what I do. And for the first time in my life since writing Indistractable, I consistently follow through. And that's everything, right? That's the macro skill. That's the skill of the century. Because look, the world is only going to become a more distracting place. Technology is going to become more distracting. Food is going to become more delicious. Entertainment is going to be more entertaining, right? That's not going backwards. And so there really will be a bifurcation, I think, between people who let their time and attention be manipulated by others and people who say, no, I am indistractable. I do what I say I'm going to do. So for me, this was a long process. I mentioned it took me 5 years to write this book, mostly because the first few years I was still crazy distracted. So it took me a long time.
Yeah.
But then once I figured out these research-backed techniques, which, by the way, I didn't make up, right? There's no original research in this book. What I did was put together what actually works that's backed by peer-reviewed studies in a model that people can actually implement in their lives. But once I started implementing this, man, the lifestyle changes kept rolling. So I'm in the best shape of my life. I have a six-pack abs. I've never had a six-pack in my life. Like I mentioned, I used to be clinically obese. That's never happened to me before. And again, it's not because of good genes. It's just because I consistently do what I say I'm going to do. I have a better relationship with my family than I ever had before. I'm more productive at work, all because I don't get in my way. I follow through.
Now, one of my wrap-up questions was going to be, how are you wealthy? And you've described that. It's how are you mentally wealthy? And you talk about the state of the relationships that you have. You're in the best shape of your life, habits, routines, all of those things that are built in there. Was there anything else? Was there an emotional moment, or was there a reflective moment that you had that led to that transition, or that led to you saying, you know what? Because yes, you can see the power of not being distracted, but sometimes it takes a little bit of something to push us to make that level of lifestyle change.
And I want to be very clear. This doesn't mean you never get distracted. I still get distracted from time to time. Look, I made up the word indistractable, so I can make up the definition too. So the definition of becoming indistractable doesn't mean you never get distracted. It means that you strive to do what you say you're going to do. You're the kind of person who is as honest with themselves as they are with others. So the difference between a distractible person and an indistractable person is that an indistractable person knows why they got distracted and they can do something about it. So Paulo Coelho has a wonderful quote. He said, "A mistake repeated more than once is a decision." A mistake repeated more than once is a decision. So a distractible person keeps getting distracted by the same things again and again. How many times can we blame our phones? How many times can we blame email? How many times can we blame these things before we say, enough, I'm going to do something about it? An indistractable person knows why they got distracted. There's only 3 causes of any distraction: an internal trigger, an external trigger, or a planning problem. That's it. So if you know that, you can say, okay, you got me once, distraction. This still happens to me from time to time. You got me once, it's okay. It's not going to happen again because I'm going to take steps today to prevent getting distracted tomorrow.
Nir, this has been phenomenal. This type of stuff, this stuff that we're talking about right here, it can apply to so many things, whether it's work, whether it's how you manage your finances, whether it's getting back into athletic shape, just anything, even just more generally how you live your life in terms of being intentional. So you say indistractable, and in the back of my head, I'm thinking intentional and intentionality.
Huge part of it.
Being key. Yes. So the book, Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. Tell the Mental Wealth Squad where they can find it. I know it's probably in all the outlets, all the places, and also if folks want to get a hold of you around the web.
Absolutely, yeah. So on my blog, nirandfar.com is where you can learn more from me. And if you go to the Indistractable website, that's at indistractable.com. It's spelled I-N, the word distract, able.com, so indistractable.com. There's actually a complimentary 80-page workbook. We couldn't fit it into the final edition of the book. It got too long, so we decided to give it out for free, and you can get that whether you get the book or not. It's yours to keep. And of course, that's completely complimentary at indistractable.com. And Indistractable is available wherever books are sold.
Awesome. Nir, thanks for coming on the podcast. Had a blast, and y'all better go and get that goodness. Thanks to Nir for coming on the podcast. I'm glad we got to have this conversation, and even more glad I got to release it now. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with your network because there's someone out there who can benefit from this goodness. Don't keep it from them. Also, don't forget to reach out if you're interested in having me come speak for Mental Health Awareness Month or any other time this year. If you followed my journey, you know that I walk the talk and vice versa. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new episode and hopefully some good news from my competition in Louisville. My body feels the best that it's felt in a long time, and I'm feeling good about how that's going to translate to the long jump and triple jump sands. But until next time, be well.